Welcome back, horror fans, cinephiles, and Giallo enthusiasts. I am Tanner Leeser, your host for all things Giallo and Giallo adjacent here on The King in Giallo. Back by viewer demand is yet another Giallo adjacent review coined How Giallo Is. And today we are talking about one of the first thrillers that could truly be labeled as the first proto-Giallo, The Mannequin in Red, released in 1958. Here is How Giallo Is, The Mannequin in Red. My prediction for the movie's GialliTally score. In terms of Giallo film cliches, I don't think it is high. I will say around 300 points, 400 tops. Well, let's begin the GialliTally and review portion of the video. We will skip past the previewing cliches. Cliche points for the title, The Mannequin in Red, contains a color, red, 5 points. First look, I'll say 15 points for this being a proto-Giallo. And would you look at that, it is plot o'clock. I know we're in Sweden, but do we have to freeze? Cold open, 5 points. The movie begins on an attempted blackmail. The blackmailer collects his 10,000 kroner, but instead of handing over letters as part of the deal, he gives falsifications. Before he can make his escape, he is apprehended by private investigator John Hillman. His assistant Freddy signals the police to take over, but they seem distracted. Useless police, 2 points. John checks in on the older man who was his client in this matter. Police Inspector Ögren returns the man's cash, and John gives him the actual letters of blackmail. Ögren informs John that he has one final client in the category of blackmail, Katja Sundin, the Red Mannequin. She's been missing 2 days. In the last couple years, she has changed her last name. He says she's a specialist in insider information, then promises John, if he finds her, that Ögren will pay him. Exposition dumping, 2 points. Freddy asks John if he could have a nice car during this next assignment, but John says this matter will be so brief that it won't be necessary. Foreign locales, Sweden, 5 points. Credit sequence, a very interesting credit sequence. They arrive at the house of John and his wife Kaisa, but she's not there. John finds a message she has left on an audio recording device, 5 points. The message informs John that Kaisa is meeting a woman at the fashion house La Femme at 8. Freddy points out that Kaisa has been gone all night, and John realizes that La Femme is where the red mannequin, Katja, works. Cut to La Femme. F is for fashion, extra points for character working in fashion, 10 points. This is Miss Lindberg, the head mistress here. She hires Kaisa, knowing full well that she is a private investigator, and tasks her with keeping an eye on the models. They will keep this matter secret. Kaisa has done some modeling before and will blend right in, or so she says. She observes a grotesque display outside the window, an effigy of a woman hung and swinging on the gallows. Miss Lindberg says it is an intimidation attempt by the construction builders, so she'll grant them a topping out party. Chekhov's gallows? Animals featured, pet cat, 2 points. Miss Lindberg checks with her assistant, Miss Birgitta Lindell, to see if they are ready to begin. Miss Lindell summons all the models, seamstresses, and such. Then Miss Lindberg wheels herself in. This young woman at the front notices Kaisa and waves to her, but is swiftly admonished against making a scene. Sonia is castigated by Miss Lindberg for wearing clashing colors of lipstick and nail polish. Miss Lindberg asks Miss Morel, also called Peter, what's the proposed run for the show? As Miss Lindberg tears Miss Morel's idea apart, we catch Sonia being bird-brained and asking Kaisa what she's doing here, prompting Kaisa to again quickly shut her down and inform her not to let the others know that the two know each other. This is all overheard by Brigitte here. Miss Lindberg exits, demanding the high standards of their fashion house to be upheld by all. Kaisa tells Sonia that she'll explain everything later. The boys show up outside. While staring at the window display, the mannequin inside seems to move. Immediately they realize that this is a real woman, dead, with a knife in her back. The victim is none other than the red mannequin herself, Katja. K is for knives, 5 points. G is for gloves, 5 points. On the way to inform the police, John runs into his wife inside. Spiral staircase featured, 5 points. He finds 2 cops who happen to be there and tells them that they have found a body. Cut to Ögren on the phone with his superiors. T is for telephone, 5 points. Ugrin tells John that Katja was killed last night. Then he tells John and Kaisa to go to dinner tonight at a restaurant where Gabrielle von Hook works as a singer. She is the niece of the head mistress, Miss Lindberg. Later that night at the restaurant, Miss von Hook is serenading the diners. I'll point out that regardless of me not having a cliche in my tally for it, this would qualify as diegetic music, which is very common in Giallo. Miss von Hook approaches Miss Morel, then the Hillman couple. After the song, she sits with Miss Peter Morel. There seems to be something more to their relationship, but for a film in 1958, perhaps this is being reined in. Or I'm just wrong. Peter tells Gabrielle about how insufferable her aunt was at work today. They cheers to Miss Lindberg's demise and to Gabrielle's good health as an heiress. Gabrielle asks if her aunt could be killed off quietly, and Peter says that it could be arranged. The two women take off, but Peter notices Kaisa and introduces Gabrielle to the new model. Gabrielle remarks that Kaisa is the replacement to the red mannequin, and Kaisa quips the dead mannequin. This elicits a reaction from the two suspicious women. Even the soundtrack chimes in. There's more drama at the fashion house. Miss Lindberg wants Peter to call the police to deal with the builders versus just letting them have their damn customary right of a topping off ceremony. We meet this man, who requests to speak with his aunt finally, but she makes him wait further. We learn his name is Bobby and that he is due to inherit everything. Brigitte reminds Bobby of their agreement. The two seem to have a fling. He laments being forced to wait, blaming it on being Miss Lindberg's foster son. Brigitte goes to speak with Miss Lindberg to try and speed things up. Kaisa meets Bobby and begins asking him about the dead model, Katja. Q is for questions, 5 points. She asks him why he thinks Katja was murdered. Bobby squirms in his seat, then says it was blackmail. Everyone knows that. He begins to say that some guy must have, then is cut off by Brigitte's return. She says his mother is ready to see him. He reminds her, aunt, not mother. During their talk, we can hear Miss Lindberg yelling at Bobby. Y is for yelling, extra points for a hysterical woman yelling, 10 points. Miss Lindberg is upset and insulted at Bobby's request for money so he can pursue his own career. You see, she has done a lot to see that he inherits everything, but Bobby has no interest in fashion. She insults his will and lack of character, and Bobby groans about how he is a foster son, nothing more, and yet his foster mother, or aunt, has been dominating all his life. Before they part ways, Bobby insults his aunt, and she threatens to take him out of the will. Everyone was apparently listening in. On his way out, Bobby runs into the Von Hook siblings. He congratulates Gabrielle for she will be sole inheritor now. She states if something were to happen to Miss Lindberg, it would be no surprise to anybody. The Von Hooks mention that they are taking Miss Lindberg out to lunch. There's a brief moment with Richard Von Hook and Brigitte, which implies that he might be in love with her. Richard goes in to speak with his aunt, and we momentarily hear her on the phone demanding to speak with her lawyer now so she can alter her will. Richard and Brigitte give each other a knowing glance. Richard tells his aunt that Gabrielle and him are taking her out for her name day. When Gabrielle is summoned in, there is a foreboding beat here where she sneaks up on her aunt. Once alone, Miss Lindberg urges Gabrielle to give up singing and to prepare for taking over the fashion house. Kaisa and Sonia talk about Brigitte after she is summoned to Miss Lindberg's. Kaisa says she wouldn't stand for that kind of bullying which Brigitte endures for one day. Sonia mentions that Richard Von Hook has been over a lot lately to see Brigitte. As Brigitte shows Miss Lindberg and the Von Hooks her new garment, Gabrielle asserts that the gown is not as good as it should look, which Miss Lindberg agrees and dismisses Brigitte. After she leaves, Miss Lindberg tells Gabrielle that Brigitte does know what she is doing, but it is important to keep the subordinates in their place. Cut to John and his boss Ugrin. They mention how Katja had dozens of prominent clients, all of whom were her targets for blackmail. This is all evidenced by a diary which was found. John looks over the murder weapon, an antique 17th century dagger. We follow a school field trip inside a museum. C is for children, 5 points. John meets with Richard Von Hook. Apparently, the two once competed against each other in racing. John asks Richard about the red mannequin. When asked how come, John says it is because Richard was one of the people in her business file, her blackmail victims. Richard cannot understand why. John then asks Richard about the dagger, which he identifies as having been stolen in Germany during the 30 Years' War. John asks if it is stolen from Richard's collection at the museum, but he claims that he cannot be of any further assistance. There's a brief scene where Brigitte watches Kaisa being invited over later tonight with John by Miss Lindberg. We get another brief scene where Freddy and Sonia have a bit of a tiff. Freddy tries in vain to fix his scooter, which is handled by Sonia giving it a good kick. Faulty car or car trouble. Yes, scooters count. 2 points. Kaisa and John arrive outside Miss Lenberg's. Kaisa mentions that Miss Lenberg has been paralyzed for 3 or 4 years after a car accident, but it is all psychological. Inside, John notices a display of weapons with an identical 17th century dagger. Art featured, extra if the art is central to the plot. 10 points. Miss Lenberg says that the knives are part of a set of 4 family heirlooms passed down on her mother's side. Gabrielle and Richard von Hoek each have 1, as does Bobby. Miss Lenberg has the 4th. Upstairs, we are told that Miss Lenberg's maid was called away to deal with a sick relative. Also, over tea, we learn that Miss Lenberg took a powder for her headache, which she states was probably not a good idea. Outside, we see someone in the shadows. Miss Lenberg tells the Hillmans that she is not afraid for her life because she has a gun, but she is fearful that someone is trying to damage the reputation of her fashion house, and thus implores the duo to find out who put the body in the window and who keeps hanging the dummy from the rafters. She hands them a check to cover their expenses. John then asks her about Katja Sundin. We only see her tell them the obvious. She was a new model who looked good. Later that night, the Hillmans leave and drive home. The interloper is still watching from the shadows. They sneak in as Miss Lenberg begins to pass out in her chair. She comes to, jostled to alertness by the smell of smoke. She tries the phone, but the line is dead. Smoke engulfs the room. Miss Lenberg tries to flee, but flames cut off her escape. She screams for her cat, which is missing. A black-gloved hand grabs Miss Lenberg's family dagger. Extra points for G is for gloves, for black gloves. Another 5 points. The scene ends with the woman trapped inside, bathed in gorgeous red light. The next day, first responders are sifting through the ashes. Freddy reads a newspaper aloud which mentions that police suspect arson. A body is loaded into an ambulance. John states that the fire department was lured away last night, as was the housekeeper. The telephone line was cut, and the elevator was rendered inoperable. He searches in vain for a knife or gun. Richard von Hoek arrives and inquires about the fire. Richard comes clean to John about the family dagger he had in his possession, admitting that there are 4 total, but John tells him that Miss Lenberg's knife, which she had before the fire, is now missing. At La Femme, the women prepare to attend the funeral. Gabrielle is shook by the presence of her aunt's cat, which ought to have perished in the fire along with her. This woman enters, which is a relief to Gabrielle, who feared it was a ghost. The lady with the cat perturbs all the other women by her presence alone. Brigitte calls Kaisa into the room for a private chat. She asks if Kaisa will remain on despite Miss Lenberg's untimely demise. She plans to move forward with the fashion show and requests Kaisa's help. Gabrielle bursts in and chastises Brigitte for already placing herself in the director's seat. She kicks Brigitte out of the chair, demanding that she needs money, then presumes to install herself as boss by answering the phone. We cut to the Hillmans trying to figure out the whereabouts of all the knives. Freddy interrupts them about some used car for sale, which only grabs John's attention when it is announced that the seller is Bobby. John and Freddy go to speak with Bobby. Well, Freddy goes to see the car. They meet a mechanic who works for Bobby's used car lot, who takes John to Bobby's cottage. Outside the cottage now, John goes in to find Bobby. Bobby, as it is outside, seemingly hunting moments ago. He observes John enter into his domicile. Inside, John finds one of the daggers acting as a bookmark in a book called Talk About Rope. Odd clue, 5 points. Bobby creeps in, hangs up his rifle, and confronts John, who states he's here about the MG Sport. John brings up the knife, Bobby snatches it back and asks if John is a cop. John immediately begins interrogating Bobby about where he was the night of the fire. Bobby jokes that he was out watching it, then claims he was here alone. A is for alibi, 5 points. Bobby kicks out John, then goes to make a call, but stops. Instead, he takes off. John goes back to have one more look inside. Cut over to Peter Morel and Gabrielle. Peter is upset at Gabrielle for lying. Peter tells her that she had lied to the police about Gabrielle's alibi, but Gabrielle was elsewhere in truth. L is for lies. Extra points for someone lying about an alibi. 10 points. Gabrielle is irreverent about Peter's position. She is called away to business matters. There's a disagreement over fashion. Brigitte makes the decision, but someone says to wait for Gabrielle to weigh in. Most of the girls here seem to abhor Gabrielle taking over. In storms Bobby. He speaks with Brigitte in private and warns her that the police are after him. He questions how he can prove his claim that he was at home. Miss Lindbergh's driver comes in to remove her old wheelchair. Once alone, Bobby laments about the plainclothes detective snooping by his house. Suddenly, Bobby confirms with Brigitte that the police had claimed that the arsonist had escaped in Miss Lindbergh's car, which has now just pulled up in front of the fashion house. They observe a woman in black exit the car. They rush downstairs and find the car empty, except for Lindbergh's white cat. Z is for zoom, 5 points. The cat, Raw, runs off, being chased by Bobby. This is a first. Foot chase, 5 points. Yeah, can't say anyone has chased an animal yet. Kaisa tells John about Lindbergh's car outside, which was preceded by Bobby's arrival. Brigitte begins to become unhinged. The music implies a flying saucer is about to land outside. If there's one thing Giallo doesn't need, it's a theremin. The sound of the squeaky wheelchair is heard. Brigitte follows the sound into this room filled with mannequins. The driver informs her that he's only moved the wheelchair into this room. Ugrin and John discuss the recent developments, the car's reemergence, the autopsy being a dead end, and the knife missing. John's theory stands that the killer stole Lindbergh's knife to replace their own, which ended up in the red mannequin's back. As of late, John has acquired the remaining 3 knives, and they will run forensic tests on them. They summon Gabrielle von Hook. She reasserts her alibi that after eating at a restaurant, she left with a certain Charlie. Ugrin reveals no one can corroborate this statement, then presses her as to whether her having strange men over is a habit of hers. She claims that she doesn't remember anybody from the party she was at, a sign that it was a very fun party. She is dismissed. Ugrin reveals that Bobby's alibi was followed up on and corroborated by a woman who had called his cottage that night. His cottage is over 100 kilometers away from Lindbergh's manor, meaning it would have been impossible for him to be in 2 places at once. Extra points for A is for an alibi getting investigated. 5 more points. As for Ricard, he was asleep at home, or so he claims. Cut to a horse race. Circuit racing. I will amend this to include horse racing. 5 points. After the race, Brigitte tells the Hillmans that she will give them her tip for good luck. Meanwhile, Freddy and Sonia are on a stakeout. Well, Freddy is. They see Gabrielle and follow her. Urban locales, 2 points. As they tail Gabrielle, they themselves are tailed. Brigitte's tip pays off for John. She dismisses herself to attend to business with Gabrielle before the latter takes a trip to Spain for a month. Gabrielle is followed back to La Femme. She enters through the back door. This drawing kinda looks like a woman in a noose. Gabrielle enters this darkened room and asks, "Is that you?" But the only response she receives is the black-gloved killer silencing her from the shadows. Killer's identity is hidden due to the framing. 2 points. Outside, Freddy struggles to lockpick his way inside. They are caught by a watchman, but manage to lie their way out of it, passing themselves off as some lovers just looking for a secluded place. They leave while they're ahead. Their tail watches them before he too is sent on his merry way by the uniformed officer. Kaisa and Brigitte pull up and notice Ricard walking along. He says he's been waiting for half an hour after coming to meet her here per her summons, but she denies ever setting up such a rendezvous. John walks up. Brigitte then ponders where Gabrielle is. Kaisa notices the birds are all riled up. The workers hung up another dummy, so it seems. Only this is no dummy. Hanging from the gallows is Gabrielle. The next day, John reads to Freddy in the papers that he and Sonia are under suspicion after their encounter the previous day with the watchman outside the scene of the crime. The euphemisms spoken between Freddy and Sonia are taken out of context and seem rather damning. The Hillmans press the joke, thus making Freddy paranoid that homicide detectives will be coming for him. He calls up Sonia and tells her to dye her hair black, quickly. Ricard comes to speak with John and admits that Katja was trying to blackmail him because he had forged Miss Lindbergh's name onto a bill of exchange while he was at university. He'd paid her 5,000 kroner, and even after everything was settled, he feared the fiasco would come back to rear its ugly head. He claims innocence of the Red Mannequin's murder, however. John believes him. Ricard suggests, regarding his sister's murder, that John should investigate Peter Morel, because he read that the police are searching for a mysterious couple. After a brief comedic beat, we find Brigitte and Kaisa discussing the weird circumstances plaguing the fashion house. Brigitte suspects that the killer believes that she knows something and will target her next. She procures Miss Lenberg's pistol, stating that the old woman had accidentally left it here the night of her murder. Brigitte claims that she knows how to use a firearm from her time spent in occupied France during the war. She says her whole family was killed, and at 16, she joined La Resistance, where she learned fearlessness. However, she is terrified because of the killer's wantonness. She then confesses to lying to the police about calling Bobby the night of the fire because he was desperate for an alibi to be corroborated. She insists that he is innocent because he loved his foster mother. Just then, the two notice the mysterious lady with the cat. By the way, that's what she's called on IMDb. Cut to John displaying the daggers: Bobby's, Gabrielle's, Ricard's, and the murder weapon. As theorized earlier, the killer stole the one from Miss Lenberg's to replace their own, which had been used as the murder weapon. Ugrin breaks the news to John about Bobby's alibi being a hoax. They bring in Miss Lenberg's housekeeper to see if she can identify the knife belonging to the old lady. Ugrin states how the three murders surely must be committed by the same person, but I'm not sure how he can figure that with certainty. John mentions the motivation for everything must be Lenberg's estate, and the haste for the murders was to anticipate her changing the will. Hypothetically, the three heirs would receive a third each, except Ricard, who now would also inherit his sister's share. But how does the red mannequin fit into everything? Perhaps she caught wind of the conspiracy and had to be silenced. The housekeeper is invited in and shown the knives. After 22 years of loyal service, she can accurately identify Miss Lenberg's knife as the one missing a stone on the back handle and having a scratch from when she had once tried to use the knife to pry a can open 12 years ago. This knife was found in the possession of Bobby. Police show up to arrest Bobby, but he flees. Here's a real foot chase just so we're square. I love how Bobby seemingly has an escape car. As Bobby eludes capture, Brigitte tells Ricard that last night someone tried to break in and she fears it could have been Bobby because she turned him in. Red roses are delivered to Ricard, but the message with them is ominous, potentially threatening. Outside, Freddy shows up with a new car that John gave him. He tries to impress Sonia, but the car is having trouble starting up again. Ricard departs, more jokes with the car, which might just need gas. Inside, Brigitte informs Kaisa that someone has stolen the pistol. Kaisa proposes that perhaps Brigitte had left it at the office. Peter, who is suspiciously standing outside, suggests to Brigitte to consider Ricard. While ambling about the theater, Brigitte is confronted by Bobby. He beseeches her for help, for money so he can escape to South America. She rejects giving him any help, and Bobby asserts that she will never be rid of him, then pleads for her to say that she loves him back, even inviting her to just lie, since they are standing on a stage. She flees. Kaisa and Sonia are talking about Freddy. Brigitte finds Ricard and reveals that Bobby was here in the theater. As a guided tour passes through the theater, the curtain is lifted and the dead body of Bobby is seen lying on stage. Police, Ricard, and Brigitte enter. Bobby was shot. Curious as he is clutching a pistol in his hand. We cut to a funeral. Funeral scene, 2 points. The lady with the cat is here as well. P is for priest, 5 points. The Hillmans and Freddy ponder what could be the case. They reckon the killer was killed. Peter is suggested as she has no alibi, but she has no motive either. Ugrin walks up and adds that Ricard is now sole inheritor. Plus, it was discovered that no one heard the gunshot. The latest is that Bobby's cottage was broken into. John declares that he'll check out the break-in. Ugrin reminds John that Katja Sundin is key to all of this, but the connection may have followed Bobby into the grave. Who stole the pistol is also a key mystery. Kaisa approaches the lady with the cat, but she walks away, then seemingly transforms into this groundskeeper. While searching for clues, Kaisa is locked into this room full of coffins. Add up full points for funeral scene for characters learning new information at the funeral. That's 3 more points. At the cottage, John notices the booze is untouched, as are the valuable paintings, implying there was a different motive at work here than just robbery. Back with Kaisa, she frightens herself at the sight of a dead body in a coffin. She is let out by the groundskeeper. Later on, the fashion show is in progress at the theater and seems to be a great success. John learns from a tour guide that most 18th century desks have hidden compartments. Brigitte discovers another omen in the dressing room, a black funeral veil. but she is called out to the stage. She models the bridal gown as the orchestra plays Mendelssohn's Wedding March, but she notices the lady with the cat in the audience, taunting her with the funeral veil. Kaissa borrows another model's car keys. After the show, Ricard gives a speech to the staff about how, despite him being the owner now technically, he will leave the business to be run by his new wife, Brigitte. The last one to cheer for them is Peter. John and Freddie break into Bobby's cottage in search of a will, which may have been missed by Ricard, assuming he's the one who broke in. John finds a letter, the contents of which seem to have caused the murder of Katja Sundin and the killer themselves, but we fade out before we are privy to what it is. Kaissa has followed the lady with the cat to a shop of various antiques. She finds the lady and confronts her about locking her in back at the graveyard, then asks her how long she has had that cat, but the lady tells her off. Ricard leaves Brigitte for the night, and once alone, she begins to hear a voice calling her name. But we know who it is. Aliens. The voice continues to call out. Suddenly, the squeaky wheelchair is heard, and in wheels Miss Lenberg with her cat on her lap. E is for eyeballs, 5 points. I might be generous with that, but it's okay. Miss Lenberg accuses Brigitte of administering a sleeping drug to her so she could be more easily killed off by Bobby. She then unveils burn scars on her face, then reveals that the body recovered by the police was her 3,000-year-old antique mummy. She had indeed escaped the conflagration and sought refuge with her old friend, the lady with the cat. She laid low until she discovered who orchestrated her demise, Brigitte. But Brigitte claims it was Bobby all along, but Miss Lenberg refutes that he was only Brigitte's instrument. Lenberg asserts that Brigitte had used Bobby to get rid of them all and planned to marry him, except Ricard came along, who was more desirable to her and a better match for her new status. Lastly, she declares that Brigitte killed Bobby with Lenberg's own stolen pistol. Brigitte finally admits it, but she runs to the higher ground and submits that she is safe up here, for Miss Lenberg cannot walk. Well, Miss Lenberg locks the chair and stands right the fuck up to the terror of Brigitte. Miss Lenberg professes that during the fire, she learned that she could walk, reminding us that her paralysis was psychological. She taunts the mortified girl, who then runs for her life. And in a rather stereotypical early horror film fashion, the old lady catches up to her quarry and begins to choke the life out of her without the virile young woman ever fighting back. The squeeze is applied. The Hillmans break in at the last moment to prevent Miss Lenberg from doing anything foolish, but all they find is Brigitte's body crashing to the ground. She is...
dead.
Thanks, John. Miss Lenberg walks down the spiral stairs and rings up the police. And that's the movie. But before we proceed, let's add up some final cliches. Extra points for T is for telephone, for the killer making a call, 5 more points. Drugs given against another person's will, 10 points. Character takes prescription pills, 5 points. We don't see it, but yeah, whatever. S is for secrets, 5 points. I won't say extra points for this. Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. Fuck it. Let's do it. S is for secrets. Extra point for the killer having an impossible to predict motivation. 10 points. I mean, beyond the blackmail, we don't really know the full extent of the love triangle. O is for obsession to Bobby, and extra points for the killer being obsessed. 10 points. He is obsessed with Brigitte after all. U is for undercover to the lady with the cat. 5 points. She is taunting everybody with her presence after all. W is for witness here, 5 points. Hidden identity of the killer until the final moments, 5 points. The killer is killed by someone, 10 points. Someone dies by falling to their death, 15 points. Someone faked their own death, 5 points. And the accomplice is killed, 5 points. And that's the Mannequin in Red. Not bad. A tad slow and a tad long, but I will say certifiably giallo. In the same way that Rome wasn't built in a day, giallo wasn't built with a single film. Giallo became a genre and a movement of cinematic expression. The roots are in literature, theater, and cinema, and several films helped to mold it into what it became. Did the Mannequin in Red influence Mario Bava? We can't say for sure, but it sure seems so. Similar to Bay of Blood influencing Friday the 13th, some elements could be coincidental, others seem way too similar to be ignored. Is this film worth checking out for Giallo fans? Yes, but be warned, you might have to search long and hard through sketchy streaming websites to find a version of the film which is both in good quality and with correct subtitles playing at the right moments. The first time I found this movie and screen recorded it, the English subtitles were at first 30 seconds late, and then they were like 15 seconds early, so I had to find a new stream. And I finally found it after coming across at least 5 other streams, some of which were hosted on adult websites, and let me tell you how awkward it was to try and screen record this movie while I was at work, hit play, and I get a porn ad. Yeah. Thankfully, I'm alone at work when I show up. I digress. The film certainly feels like a proto-giallo. There are instances that remind me of Bava's style, but way more reined in. It does look and feel like an early giallo precursor that was still holding on to some genre ties to older things, such as detective fiction, Hitchcockian thrillers, and German Krimi films of this same decade. Similar to how we measure the epochs of the Earth using the geological timescale, there is never a single moment where we can say, this is it, right here is the transition point. The development of genres takes time until it becomes undeniable that the new era has arrived and we are already living in it. The Mannequin in Red was certainly within the transitional period of detective thrillers developing into Italian giallo films. And then with Blood and Black Lace, the transition was already happening, and by the time we got The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, it was a thing. Weird, I know. Let's segue to the GialliTally cliches for this movie. Post-giallo viewing cliches. The reason for the killing. Greed and gain. 5 points. Yes, I could make cases for other choices also, but this is the dominant motivation for most of the kills. The reason for the investigation. Private investigators. 3 points. Bonus points. The style bonus. The film is stylish, but hardly recognizable with what we call giallo. We have some floating camera work, usage of colored lights to a lesser degree, but definitely usage of colors in general, particularly red. We have 1 or 2 zooms, but they are slow and dramatic, not the crash zooms. Also, there's a lot of fading between the scenes. The film does have style, but a very different kind. Out of a max of 25 points, I will give Mannequin in Red 11 points for its style bonus. Soundtrack.
Men mannen hade kniv som med 3 raska snitt gjorde slut på hans liv.
Sure. 15 points. Bad effects. Honestly, the first time I saw this, I didn't think it was a dummy, but it certainly is. Yeah, at first I was like, oh my god, how did they do that? 15 points. Final look. Extra points. The Deadpool, tallying how many kills and deaths are featured in the film. I break it down as thus: 10 points per kill or death scene for the main Deadpool, plus any stylistic kill multipliers, which we didn't add yet, plus the knife kill bonus. We have Katja Sundin, impaled with a knife, 21 points. Gabrielle von Hook, we don't see it, but because we find her hanged, I'll grant garroted or strangled with an object, 13 points. Bobby, gunshot, 10 points. This random dead guy, 10 points. And Birgitta Lindell, choked with hands, 12 points. Yes, I did also count her as falling to her death. Lucky you, Birgitta, you earned both. Extended Deadpool for those other deaths mentioned but not seen, I'll give 3 points for each. None. Red herrings for the total number of legitimate suspects in the film. 5 points per legit suspect are awarded. We have Miss Lindbergh, Birgitta Lindell, Peter Morel, Gabrielle von Hook, Richard von Hook, Bobby Nordahl, the lady with the cat, and Miss Lindbergh's driver, because he was very suspicious in a handful of scenes. 40 points for red herrings. Flashback sequences, 5 points each. We have none. Nudity, I award 5 points for ass, 7 for breasts, and 10 for genitalia. We have none. Ladies and gentlemen, for The Mannequin in Red, I awarded the film an AZ score of 16 out of 26. With the bonus points for these, we have a modified score total of 120 points. And for the full GialliTally score, I award The Mannequin in Red a GialliTally score of 412 points. Compared to The Case of the Bloody Iris in first with 830 points, Slaughter Hotel in second with 827 points, and A Lizard in a Woman's Skin in third with 759 points, The Mannequin in Red would be somewhere near 30th place. I predicted 300 to 400 points, so I lowballed this one. But, like I say, these points do not mean a movie is better or worse. Please like this video, share it with your friends if they are horror fans or cinephiles, subscribe to The King in Giallo if you haven't yet, and if you have any questions, thoughts, curiosities, or concerns, leave those below in the comments section and I will get back to you. Please, though, don't give me any feedback on any mispronunciations. I tried, but Swedish names are really rough for me. Give The King in Giallo a follow on Instagram and a like on Facebook. Thank you very much for your continued support, and a special thank you to those who support me directly on Patreon. This is Tanner Leeser for The King in Giallo, and if nothing else, I'll see you next time.
Gud, vilken reklam, va? Som en värsta realisation. Och snygga snutar överallt.
Men ingen är feg, va? Pys.